Hi everyone, welcome back. I hope you're all doing well. So the other week I was in my kitchen, just at the kitchen table, eating my dinner. I had the news on in the background when a story came on that absolutely shocked me to my core because the presenter started talking about a child abuse sex ring that had been operating here in the UK and it had gone completely unnoticed for about a decade. I literally stopped eating dinner and I was like, what?
Every day for more than 2 months, they came and they went. On trial, accused of the most grotesque crimes. Pedophiles who orchestrated regular nights to rape children.
And all of this took place in a cramped, filthy, disgusting apartment in Glasgow. 10 plus adults could be living in this apartment at any one time. And they would carry out the most horrific physical and sexual abuse on these children. They also would invite known pedophiles to the apartment as well. They were basically selling these children. And why were they doing this? Because these 10 plus adults wanted to make money for drugs. That was the sole purpose, make money to buy drugs. And this drug den that carried out this horrific abuse on the children, this case has been known as the Beastie House. And it is one of the worst child sex rings ever exposed in the UK. And I do have to give a warning for today's case because the abuse is absolutely horrific. It's truly the stuff of nightmares. Cases like this you wish weren't true, but unfortunately they are. And it is going to be a very distressing case to listen to today, so just be prepared for that. So let's jump in. And I just want to give a huge thank you to today's sponsor, and that is June's Journey. And if you haven't checked out this game already, you need to because it's amazing. Because in the game, you play as amateur detective June Parker. She's confident, charming, has high emotional intelligence, an amazing eye for spotting clues. But suddenly, her sister Claire has been murdered, as well as her brother-in-law Harry. And when the case gets investigated, the police rule it as a murder-suicide. And June is absolutely shocked. There is not a single shred of evidence to support this. No motive, no witnesses. June is fully convinced that there is a cover-up going on. And the detectives on the case tell her to keep her nose out of it. But does June like being told what to do? No. She does not. And she is determined to uncover the truth for herself. And the game takes you on a wild journey that spans family relationships, motherhood, love, betrayal, social injustice, and much, much more. It's also constantly evolving. New chapters launch each week. And I cannot begin to explain how captivating the storyline is in this game, especially for us true crime fans. And right now, the game has just released an exciting new trailer, which you should all definitely go and check out on their socials. And to celebrate this, I also have a little challenge for you guys related to the game that you all need to solve by the end of this video. And the answer to this challenge points to a clue hidden in the scene in the photo on the screen. And the challenge is, if J equals 10 and P equals 16, what does 6, 15, 15, 20, 16, 18, 9, 14, 20 mean? And if you don't know the answer right now, all will be revealed at the end of this video. And once again, I cannot recommend June's Journey enough. It is available to download for free. It is available on iOS, Android, as well as on PC. And you can download the game for free by clicking on the link in my description box or by scanning the QR code that is on your screen right now. And using that link rather than going to the App Store really does help out this channel because it lets June's Journey know that you came from this video. So thank you again to June's Journey for sponsoring today's video, and thank you to every single one of you guys watching right now, because truly without all of you guys I wouldn't get opportunities like this. And now let's jump into today's case. Okay, so for the start of today's case, we need to go back to 2019 and we are heading to Glasgow, Scotland, and we are heading to a district of the city known as Townhead, where at the time a married couple from the local area, they had just taken in 3 children. And these 3 children had recently just gotten out of an awful situation. However, the married couple, they didn't quite know what the children had gone through, but they knew that the children had it tough at home. And these 3 children are very, very significant to today's case. We do not know their identities because they have been protected for privacy reasons. So they are only known as Girl A, Boy B, and girl C. We also don't know the identity of the married couple that fostered these 3 children either, which is why I am literally just saying married couple. I am not saying their names because we don't know them. We also don't know the exact ages of the children. We only know approximately how old they were. So approximately at this point in time, girl A is around 12 years old. Boy B, we know, is around 3 years younger than girl A, so boy B is around 9 years old, and then girl C is much younger. She is around 4 years old. And when this married couple took in these 3 children, the 3 children were in a terrible state. They were described as incredibly gaunt, pencil thin, malnourished. They had dark rings, circles under their eyes. Girl A had the worst case of head lice that the social worker on the case had ever seen in their 30-year career. You only needed to look at these children to know that something bad had happened to them. It was so obvious that these children had been completely neglected. Over the last few years, these children were actually left to beg for food on the streets because the home that they had come from, they were severely neglected. They were barely even fed. Sometimes these 3 children were just given a small piece of chocolate for breakfast, and that was it. And the 2 oldest children would often seek solitude at a local social club because they were just desperate for a warm meal, for just company, for just warmth. It was the kind of social club that did offer free meals to those that needed it. And I also think that it had something to do with a local church as well, like it was a social club like within the church. And the members of this social club, they were obviously very concerned about these children because it was only girl A and boy B that were going to the social club because girl C was just too young at that time. So the social club members would see this malnourished boy and girl come into the social club begging for food. They were also incredibly filthy. Their hygiene needs were not being met. Boy B was apparently so unclean that you couldn't even sit next to him because of his stench. So the social members were incredibly concerned about these children. So of course they kind of like took them in whenever they could. They gave these children a meal. They also cleaned them up. They would actually show these children love and care, affection, which they had never received at the home that they came from. The social club even fixed the Christmas raffle to make sure that the children won so that they would have some food over the festive period. And then in June of 2019, the authorities finally decided to rescue the children from the awful home situation that they were in and place the children in foster care. So the children are then fostered by this married couple who happen to be members of that social club, which is just incredible that the children were able to go to somebody that the children were familiar with because of them going to the social club. The married couple were described as incredibly kind, friendly, and they just wanted to give these children a safe place to live, a home, just help them recover. So that is what was going on in 2019. But what was the children's home situation like? Well, no one actually knew. It was obvious that the home situation that these children were in wasn't great. It was obvious that there was neglect going on. It was obvious that the children were barely being fed, possible abuse, but no one knew the extent of what actually happened to these children in their home. The married couple didn't know, authorities didn't know, nobody knew about the decades-long abuse and torture that these 3 children had gone through. Nobody knew. The children were just too scared, too frightened. They didn't want to say a single thing. However, that was all about to change. And the truth about what these 3 children had gone through, what they had had to live through every single day of their lives was about to be revealed. Because one evening in late 2019, the children had obviously been fostered by this married couple for a while now. Things were going great. The youngest child, girl C, was up in her bedroom. She was currently asleep. And the man from the married couple was currently in the living room watching TV. When all of a sudden, the man started hearing banging and screaming coming from the upstairs bedroom that girl C was in. So he rushed upstairs to see what the commotion was because he was really worried about the children's safety. And it was girl C banging on her bedroom door, shouting, "Get me out, get me out." She was screaming this at the top of her lungs. She was hysterical because it turns out that the bedroom door had somehow gotten stuck and she couldn't open the door. And you have to remember that girl C is only 4 years old, so she's not very strong. So somehow the door had gotten stuck and girl C couldn't open the door, and she was terrified of confined spaces, which is why she was reacting like she was, which is why she was banging and screaming, why she was hysterical and terrified. The man eventually gets the door open and Girl C rushes out. She's in floods of tears. The wife tried to calm Girl C down. They tried to comfort her. They gave her a drink, and Girl C eventually settled. However, after this, the married couple knew that something wasn't right. They knew that there was something more to this story. Like, why had Girl C reacted the way she had? So later on that evening, the married couple sat the older two children down and they asked the two older children, had Girl C ever reacted like that before? And Girl A and Boy B, they were probably incredibly nervous because so far they hadn't spoken about anything about their home life prior to being fostered. They were probably incredibly nervous, scared. They were probably shifting in their seats, not wanting to talk because they were hiding this massive secret of what they had gone through. However, clearly Girl A and Boy B, they felt comfortable, they felt safe with this married couple, and they didn't want to hide anymore. They wanted to tell somebody the truth, what they had gone through. They also wanted justice for what they had been through. So it was at this point that these two brave young children decided that they were finally going to tell somebody for the first time what they had been through. And this is when the children started to talk about the decades-long worth of abuse and torture that they had been through at the hands of multiple adults. They talked about physical abuse, sexual abuse, satanic rituals, being hired out to pedophiles, forced into producing indecent images and videos. And all of this happened at a place that is known as the Beastie House. And I need to warn you now, from this moment on in this video, it is going to be very distressing. It's going to be very, very hard to listen to. Because the children's harrowing story started back in 2012. This is when Girl A was around 6 years old, Boy B was around 3 years old, and Girl C hadn't even been born at this time. And at this point, Girl A and Boy B, they were living in a flat in the district of Townend in Glasgow, Scotland, with a number of adults. There was a man named Ian Owens who was in his late 30s, a woman called Elaine Lannery who was in her late 20s, and those two were in a relationship with each other, and those two are definitely the main perpetrators in today's case. So bear these two in mind, Ian and Elaine. Evil, monsters, despicable human beings, shouldn't even be called human beings. Then alongside the two main perpetrators, we also have a whole host of other people. There was a woman called Leslie Williams in her 30s, Scott Forbes in his 40s, and Paul Brennan, Barry Watson, and John Clark all in their mid-30s. And one notable thing about today's case is that we actually do not know who the parents of these children are. Again, I assume that this has been redacted for privacy reasons, but we don't know who these children belong to. We don't know who their parents are. I mean, Ian and Elaine are the two main perpetrators in today's case. They were also in a relationship. Does this mean that they are the parents, or is one of them at least the parents of these children? Do these children even have the same parents? Even though we don't know, I do believe that Ian and Elaine are the parents of these children, and there is a reason why I think that, which I will share later on. But again, that is just my theory. We do not know. Any one of these evil adults could be the parents of these children, so just bear that in mind. All we know is that these three children, obviously at this point in 2012, only the two older children have been born yet, but as far as we know, all three of these children lived in this disgusting, filthy, cramped flat with a number of adults. And these adults did unspeakable things to these children. Also, it's not clear if all of these adults lived in this flat all at the same time. I feel like some of them maybe came and went, maybe some of them had their own home, but most of these adults are in this flat most of the time. So who are these despicable human beings? What was their background? Well, unfortunately, we actually don't know too much about the background of pretty much all of these adults. We know that the ringleader, Ian, grew up in a pretty well-off family before his parents divorced. He went on to find work as an abattoir, or in other words, a slaughterhouse. He was involved in the slaughtering of animals for production. He also found work as an asbestos remover, and he just kind of found the odd job here and there. And then in the early 2000s, Ian was currently in his early 20s. We know that he started to become addicted to drugs. It started with cannabis, it then moved on to cocaine. And then by 2001, it is said that Ian was consuming 3 to 4 bags of heroin every single day. So we are talking a serious drug addiction. He also injured his back one day at work whilst working on a building site, which meant that he could no longer work. So he got signed off work, and then his drug addiction just got worse from there. He would now remain unemployed for the rest of his life. And it is said that his sole purpose for living was drugs, was just to find money in any way that he could to buy drugs. Nothing else mattered to him. And another thing to note about Ian, which will become very clear in today's case, is that later on, he was diagnosed with a sexual sadist disorder, a pedophilic disorder, and a psychopathic personality disorder. So yes, that's great, isn't it? And as far as the other members of this child sex ring, we know that Elaine is Ian's girlfriend, but we know nothing about her background. Then the other woman of the group, who is Leslie Williams, she was currently in her 30s. We know that she does have some previous convictions from the mid-2000s, which were all related to assaults. She was convicted of aggravated robbery. She was convicted of 2 aggravated assaults causing injury, and she also had convictions for supplying Class A drugs. And one thing that we do know about Leslie is that she actually has children of her own, but they are not the children in today's case. We know that for sure. These were different children. They lived somewhere else. But all I can think about is if Leslie treats the children in today's case the way that she does, what could she possibly be doing to her own children? And even though we don't know anything, we do know that Leslie kept contact with her own children throughout the whole of this case. So then we have the other 4 members of this sex ring, Scott, Barry, Paul, and John. And we don't know anything about their backgrounds either, apart from the fact that they are all serious drug users. And like I said, these 3 children are living alongside these 7 adults in the most disgusting, filthy, cramped flat you have ever seen in your life. It is an absolute horror scene. Nobody should be living in a flat in conditions like this, let alone children. It has been described as, quote, insect-infected hellhole drug den, because there were insects everywhere, rodents everywhere, mold everywhere. There was pretty much no furniture. There was just these little green plastic chairs that they would sit on. There was the occasional children's toy just scattered around. It was cold, damp, disgusting. It smelt. And you can see a few pictures of this flat online. And it just breaks your heart when you think about children living in this environment. I don't care about those 7 adults. They deserve to live in a place like that. But 3 innocent children living in a place like that, it makes me so angry. As well, it's in plain sight to everyone. This is a ground floor flat. It just baffles me how no one did anything for so long when it's literally in plain sight what is going on. But I am jumping ahead too much there. We will get back to how bad the authorities reacted to this case later on. And these adults would just use this property as a drug den. We obviously know that Ian is unemployed, and I'm pretty sure that they were all unemployed. They would all just sit around this flat all day taking drugs. It is the literal definition of a drug den. There were stockpiles of drugs everywhere, within reach of the children. And the adults would gather together and they would all just shoot heroin together with the children in the flat. They would do it in front of the children. The things that these children were exposed to, that is bad enough. And I haven't even gotten onto the abuse yet. But that's not all. These adults were also drug dealers. So they would deal drugs from the flat, which meant that all kinds of dodgy people would be coming into this flat all of the time, day and night, to buy drugs. And again, these dodgy people, God knows what these people are like, are coming into this flat with the 3 children. And some of these dodgy people that would buy the drugs, they would stay in the flat to take the drugs, because it became known in the local area as a safe place to take drugs away from the police, away from prying eyes. So the flat has also been described as, quote, swarming with addicts. And these other drug users would just make themselves at home in this flat. God knows what they could possibly be doing to the children. There was one particularly well-known drug user in the area called Rab Brown that would go to the flat all of the time. He was also known as Rabney Legs, and he got the nickname Rab knee legs because he had to have both of his legs amputated following a lifetime's worth of drug use and injecting heroin into his legs. The environment alone of this flat is absolutely disgusting, and that alone warrants these children being taken away from this flat. But now we need to talk about the abuse, because not only were these children neglected and forced to live in this environment, they were also severely abused and tortured. And I have no idea why this abuse started, because it does seem to have started just out of the blue. It's almost like the adults just thought that it would be a bit of fun, a bit of entertainment. Was it a drug-induced thing? Were they doing it as a sick and twisted way to pass time? We just don't know. I mean, obviously, Ian, we know, is a paedophile. I mean, all of them are, but he was the ringleader, so we don't actually know why it started. But it doesn't really matter how it started, does it? Or why? Because it did. All we know is that girl A was around 6 years old when the group decided to just start beating her up. They started punching and kicking her for their own entertainment. They would run over her legs with a wheelchair, causing repeated terrible injuries. They would force her to eat cat food. They forced her to eat dry pot noodles with no water in it. They would even put a plastic bag over her head until she nearly suffocated. And the abuse started with just girl A, but then it also started on boy B as he got older. They also started to do the same for him. They would beat him up. Boy B would have scratches and bruises all over his body. They would beat Boy B with pots and pans until he was knocked unconscious. And they did this on multiple occasions. Boy B would just remember waking up in the middle of the floor with having no recollection of how he got there. And then they just started to shut the children away in dark cupboards just to get them out of the way whilst the adults took drugs. And they would leave the children in these cupboards for hours. They would also force the children to consume bottles of wine. Again, this was just another tactic to knock the children out, basically get them so drunk that they passed out so they wouldn't have to deal with the children. But if you think giving alcohol to children is bad, that is nothing compared to what they do next, because they force the children to take class A drugs. They force the children to take cocaine. They literally force them to sniff up a line of cocaine, but then they also inject the children with heroin. And the young boy just remembers feeling weird and dizzy and just not right after taking these drugs. And I just cannot believe that they are forcing these children to take drugs. They are forcing these children to take heroin. The group then started to force the young boy to be a courier for them, because remember, they're drug dealers. So they would force this young boy, he would have a load of drugs on him and he would have to go to some of the dodgiest areas in Glasgow to sell these drugs. And the group did this because they thought that no one would stop a young boy. No one would even suspect a young boy of being a drug dealer. So they would get away with it. And as you can imagine, over time, as this abuse just kept going on, and it was getting worse and worse, the two children's personalities completely changed. The young boy was initially known to be very bubbly, happy, cheerful. He was described as being a cheeky and happy type of character. But then he became hypervigilant, very reserved, extremely paranoid and fearful. And the same happened to girl A. She went from being very sweet and caring to somebody that was quite angry. She was incredibly volatile. She was always acting out. But things only continue to get worse for these children, because it started off as neglect, then it went to physical abuse, and then it turns into sexual abuse. And I, again, need to give a huge trigger warning for what we are about to talk about, because this is some horrific sexual abuse that these children were put through. Because we already know Ian, the ringleader, he was diagnosed with a paedophilic disorder, and when girl A was around 6 years old, this is when Ian started to sexually abuse her. He would take her off into a room on her own, and he would do all kinds of despicable things to her, described as the most degrading, humiliating, exploitive sexual crimes that you can imagine. So even though we don't know the exact details, it is the worst of the worst that he was doing to girl A. But he wasn't just doing it on his own. No, he would start to invite his friends to also do the same thing to girl A. He would invite his evil friend Barry Watson to also sexually abuse girl A, which is just absolutely disgusting. It does seem like Ian is the one that controlled the sexual abuse of these children. Like I said, he's the ringleader, but he is the one in charge when it comes to the sexual abuse. I mean, he is the paedophile, but they all are. Like I've already said, they all are. But then this is when Ian had another idea for how he could make money out of these children. He thought that he could profit from this sexual abuse. Ian started to consider the idea of charging his friends so that they could have access to sexually abuse girl A. I'm just honestly speechless. And it turns out this is exactly what he did. I can't believe how many paedophiles are around this case. And this is the beginnings of Ian's disgusting child sex ring. Because as more time passed, more and more people were arriving at the flat to sexually abuse girl A, whilst paying Ian for the privilege to do so. And one of the people paying for the privilege to sexually abuse girl A was one of the evil group, Paul Brennan, as well as John Clark. So all of them are paying, apart from Ian because he gets free reign. But it wasn't just people that Ian knew. There were literally strangers off the street that heard about what was going on, which included drug addicts and paedophiles, but let's be realistic, they're all paedophiles. They heard about what was going on and they thought, oh, that sounds like a good thing. That sounds like something that I want to do. So now strangers were now turning up at this flat to pay Ian to sexually abuse a child. And I just can't help but think, how are these strangers finding out about this, but not the police, not any kind of social services, no authority? How is nobody that should be finding out about this finding out? And it wasn't just Ian profiting from this. Elaine also found a way to profit from this sexual abuse as well. So Elaine, the girlfriend, possibly the mother of these children, again, we don't know that, but Elaine would hold the children down whilst strange men came into this flat to sexually abuse the children. And in the end, all 7 of this group were profiting from selling girl A. They were making a decent amount of money. And what did they spend this money on? Drugs. Because that is the sole motivating factor behind all of this. I mean, possibly not for Ian because he's a sick and twisted monster, but the main reason to do this was to make money, to buy drugs. They were committing some of the most despicable acts known to man to feed their own addiction. And this sexual abuse, it did start with girl A, but then it wasn't long until it extended to boy B. Strangers were paying Ian to sexually abuse boy B as well. But it gets worse, because it wasn't long until Ian started forcing boy B to perform sex acts on girl A in front of him so he could get his kicks. And these again might be his own children that he is forcing into doing this. Ian then started inviting people to watch boy B being forced to perform sex acts on girl A, of course for money, for a profit. It turned into a sick and twisted performance for people. Boy B has later said that the onlookers were, quote, giggling and laughing at him, encouraging him to have sex with his sister in front of strangers. And I truly cannot believe that this happened in a flat in a busy area. That is something that I really cannot wrap my head around, is how it was basically happening in the middle of this busy location. And you're telling me that no one heard anything or no one saw anything and reported it. But it gets worse. Of course it does. It always does in these cases, doesn't it? Because Ian found a way to profit even more from all of this. Because he would have what he has described as rape nights. You heard that right. Rape nights. As well as dance and sex nights, where he would basically invite everyone around, whoever wanted to come, to watch the group performance of boy B having sex with girl A. And the rape nights that he would hold, he would invite a group of men to the flat to gang rape girl A, whilst boy B was forced to stand and watch. And it's just too much, isn't it? I don't even want to think about this happening to anyone. I cannot believe that this is real. Girl A hasn't even turned 10 years old at this point, and this is what she's going through. And boy B is around 3 years younger than her. They are so young and they are going through all of this. And this went on for years and no authority discovered what was going on. Girl A went from 6 years old to 8 years old to 10 years old. Boy B was now 7 years old. And then at some point in 2015, approximately 3 years after the sexual abuse started, girl C was born. And again, we don't know who her parents are. well. At this point, Ian was around 35 years old and Elaine was 30 years old. So are they her parents? We just don't know. But what we do know is that as soon as she was born, she was thrown straight into this absolute hellhole of abuse. And the abuse of Girl C started from the moment she was born, when she was only a few weeks old. This group would hit, slap, and beat up a newborn baby. But one of the worst things that they did to Girl C was that they would shut and lock her in small, confined spaces for hours at a time. They would put her inside the microwave, the oven, kitchen cupboards, and even the fridge. You heard that right. They are putting a baby in a microwave, in a fridge. There was even a time where they nailed her clothes to the wall and just left her hanging on the wall for hours just so they could take drugs undisturbed. I don't even know how these people were allowed to have a baby in this environment and take the baby home. Like, how does no authority know about this? And this carried on for the entirety of Girl C's early years. She was constantly locked in small, confined spaces. She would be locked in dark and dingy cupboards for hours at a time. And these cupboards, they were cold, moldy, they were full of insects, spiders, beetles. And Girl C would be trapped in this confined space and she would be screaming, "Get me out, get me out." But she was completely ignored, and some of the cupboards that she was locked in had exposed electrical wires. So these places that she's been locked to are also incredibly dangerous. And this is how Girl C developed a fear of being trapped in a small confined space, which is obviously what we covered at the very beginning of this video, and it is very understandable why Girl C is scared of small spaces. She was also continued to be put in the fridge, and a padlock would be placed on the outside of the fridge so she couldn't get out. And I just can't believe that these people are putting a child in a fridge that is on. Like, it's cold in that fridge. And the other two children would actually sneak and adjust the temperature on the fridge to make it a bit warmer for Girl C, which was just incredibly sweet and brave of them, because I can imagine if they had gotten caught doing that, they would have been punished. But not just that, Girl C was also placed in the freezer. And I don't know how long she was placed in the freezer for. It couldn't have been very long because she just wouldn't have survived. Girl A and Boy B would quite often rescue Girl C from the freezer, and they would open up the freezer and Girl C would just be curled up in a ball trying to keep as warm as possible. And the little toddler would only be able to say one word, and that was help. And it was actually Girl C that named this drug den the Beastie House, because she said that it was just full of evil. It was full of evil beasts and insects. And she just found everything that went on in this house incredibly terrifying. In this case, it's just unbelievable. It's too much. It's heartbreaking to think of these children going through this kind of abuse for years. They are definitely some of the most evil people we have ever come across on this channel. On top of this, the group of adults would also punish Girl C for their own sick and twisted entertainment. They would force the toddler to crawl around on all fours and pretend to be an animal. They would make her eat dog and cat food off of the floor. And she had to pretend to be a dog for this group of people. And one time she actually ate so much dog food, she vomited. And this is also when this evil group started performing all of these satanic rituals and witchcraft practices. Now, I don't know if they actually believed in this stuff themselves or they were just doing this to scare the children. It's not entirely clear. The group started pulling out Ouija boards and started saying to the children that they could communicate with the dead. They also forced the children to participate in lessons in witchcraft, where the group would pull out fake wands and teach the children how to cast spells. The adults would also dress in robes and red devil masks. Again, this was just another tactic to scare the children. The group would pin the children down onto the floor while other members of the group would cast spells down onto the children, and it just must have been incredibly terrifying. And the children were led to believe that the adults were witches and wizards, and the children would be cursed if they ever misbehaved. This whole thing is to make sure that the children stay in line. So the children are so terrified of these adults that they never say anything to anybody. So they never report the abuse. But it gets worse. It does. Because now the group started to force the children to perform animal sacrifices as their rite of passage to become a witch or a wizard. And I do have to give a warning here because we are now going to talk about animal abuse. The group one day brought home a budgie and handed it to Boy B, and they forced Boy B to stab this budgie to death, which very sadly he did because he had no other option. And Boy B has later said that he still gets nightmares over this. And after he killed the budgie because it was his initiation into becoming a wizard, they gave him a small wooden stick and told him that that was now his wand. And also, as part of this initiation into Boy B becoming a wizard, he's now currently age 7. He was also placed in a bathtub full of blood. Now, I'm not sure if this is real blood or fake blood in some kind of way. I just don't know. It wasn't clarified. But it terrifies me thinking about this group possibly getting hold of a bathtub full of blood. And then, as another part of the initiation into becoming a wizard, they forced Boy B to eat a heart. And again, I have no idea if this was actually like a real, what I assume would be an animal heart. But regardless of whether it was a real heart or not, Boy B believed that it was, and he was forced to eat it. He was terrified throughout this whole thing. The whole thing has traumatized him. But the animal abuse gets even worse because the group held nights that they called dog killing nights. And as the title of the night suggests, they literally did kill dogs. We know of at least one occasion where a border collie dog that belonged to one of the group was brought to the drug den and the adults, quote, cut and stabbed the dog to death. All of this was for their own entertainment. All of this was probably performed in front of the children as well. And I have no words. They're now killing dogs. I don't think these people can get much worse. And the abuse has been monumental at this point. These children are living in an absolute nightmare day in, day out, hour after hour. But there is one final tragic topic that we need to talk about, which unfortunately involves more sexual abuse. Because right after Girl C was born, the sexual abuse continued. But now Girl C was also dragged into this sexual abuse as a newborn baby. She was sexually abused from when she was very, very young, and she had also been, quote, raped by members of the gang while she was still wearing a nappy. They are raping a baby. I have no words. There are no words to describe how evil these people are. How do people like this actually exist? How are there people on this planet that want to rape a baby, a newborn baby, so defenseless, and they're still in a nappy? There is also apparently a 4th child in this apartment as well at this time. Maybe it's one of Leslie's children. Remember, she has her own children. Maybe it's one of her children also at this apartment. But there is no apparent abuse of this 4th child, but there may have been, it just hasn't been reported. However, the gang still continue to sexually abuse the 3 children, Girl A, Boy B, and Girl C. And this had been going on for 7 years of Girl A's life. Boy B is now forced to perform sex acts on Girl C when Girl C is between the ages of 2 and 4. They also force Girl A to join in. And as all 3 children are getting older, the group are still inviting pedophiles into the flat to sexually abuse the children as well. And obviously now Girl C is involved in this. People are now paying to abuse Girl C as well. The 2 women, Leslie and Elaine, were the ones that organised the child sex ring. They would be the ones to send out invitations to people that they knew, known pedophiles in the area, inviting them over to the flat to abuse or watch the children being abused in exchange for money. It was very organised. People would turn up at this flat, they would abuse the children, and they would pay on the door on their way out. There was also a literal timer that would beep that would indicate when one paedophile would stop the abuse and when the next paedophile could go in. It's unbelievable that it is so organised, this child sex ring, and it is happening in a flat with neighbours. How did no one hear anything that was going on? The 2 women were also involved in holding the children down whilst they were being sexually abused. And then they collected all of the money at the end of the night, and then they would go and spend it all on drugs. The 2 women would also start to put on sexualised shows where they would force Girl A, when she was between the ages of 10 and 12, to dance around in lingerie for these strange men, and she would be forced to strip at the same time as dancing. There was even one time where Ian and Elaine offered to sell Girl A to a paedophile so he could take her on holiday to Turkey. Now, I don't know if that ever happened. I think if it did happen, we would probably know about it, but again, I'm not sure. And then, just to make things even worse, because of course they're going to get worse, all of these sex acts, all of the abuse was now going to be captured on camera. The group started creating indecent images and videos of the children. They just started to record everything. They would also produce girl A dancing in a sexualized manner in the lingerie. They would also capture footage of the children assaulting each other. They would also capture footage of the children being sexually abused individually. And various members of the group would be stood behind the camera. There would be a tripod and everything, like it was a professional setup. There was even a time where boy B was forced to record girl A being abused. And I don't know this for sure, but it's likely that this footage was being sold on, because this group did everything for money, for drugs. So why else would they start to produce all of this footage? However, what we do know is that the group had a viewing gallery. So again, they would send out invitations to pedophiles to come and view this footage in the flat. And I assume money was exchanged. There was even some footage of girl A being gang raped, and pedophiles would gather to watch this footage. And this sexual assault was so brutal and violent, girl A apparently passed out at the end of it. And I am just speechless. This case is one of the sickest, most depraved cases I've ever come across. And I can't believe that it was happening in a residential area for over a decade. And throughout my research, when I first heard about this case, even now, all I can think about is how were they getting away with it? And you're all probably thinking, well, the authorities didn't know. It's just one of those cases that slipped through the cracks. Well, you would be wrong, because authorities did know. Yeah, let that sink in. The authorities did know. The children first came into contact with Child Protective Services in 2017. 2 years before the children were finally rescued. Why the hell were these children left in this drug den to be abused for 2 years? So in 2017, when the children first came on the radar of Child Protective Services, the children are ages 10, 7 and 2. The children were incredibly malnourished. They were neglected. You only had to look at them to realise that they are being neglected and possibly abused. They are kept in an awful, unhygienic drug den. That alone is grounds to take a child out of an environment without even the sexual abuse coming up. But did social workers pick up on any of this abuse? No, they didn't. Trained professionals did not pick up on one single sign of abuse. I don't think it could be more clear that these children are being abused in some kind of way. I don't think anyone in their right mind would actually think that these children are being abused to the extent that they are, but it is as clear as day that these children are being abused and neglected. But social workers would routinely visit this flat. Let that sink in. Social workers are actually going out to this flat. Do I need to remind you of what this home looks like? So these social workers were going to this flat, which is a drug den. It is so obviously a drug den. Sometimes these social workers would visit daily, and not once did any social worker that visited that flat think to themselves, I think this is not the right kind of environment for children. Maybe they're being abused. Are they being neglected? I think we need to remove these children. Not one person thought that. I am sorry, who in their right mind visits that flat and thinks it's an okay environment to raise children? The environment alone should be grounds enough to question more. And also they're producing child indecent images and videos. Surely there's evidence of that in that flat. I can tell you now, the 7 people that were living in this flat, they're not the brightest bulbs in the box. They wouldn't have been able to cover their tracks very well. And it seems to me that the social workers are not the brightest bulbs in the box either. Now, of course, typical abusers, Ian and Elaine were coaching the children on what they were and were not allowed to say to the social workers. The children were never allowed to mention the abuse. But the thing is, social workers are trained to know this, or at least they should be. So the children had to pretend that everything was okay. But that happens in 9 cases out of 10, that the victim always says that it's okay, that there's nothing going on. And I don't know if these children went to school. There's part of me that thinks they must be going to school because it's a legal requirement for these children to be going to school. But then another part of me thinks, Well, they can't be going to school because surely if they're going to school, you would think a teacher would intervene and maybe report the abuse and neglect of these children. So I just don't know. I don't know if these children were going to school or not. But quite frankly, it doesn't really matter because authorities know. These children are known to authorities and I want to pull out my hair and scream because no one did anything about these children. This is one of the worst child abuse cases I have ever come across, and I just cannot believe that no one did anything. It is crazy to me that the abuse went unnoticed for 5 years. That alone is terrible. But now the children are known to authorities for 2 years before they are removed, and still no one does anything. And I just feel so sorry for the children, I do, because they probably felt that no one was ever going to help them or save them from this. So these children are put through 2 more years of unnecessary abuse. And now we get to June of 2019, which is where we were at the beginning of this video. And this is finally when allegations of abuse made it to social services and the children were finally removed from the household, which thank God it only took them 2 years. And this was when the children were placed in foster care and they were fostered by that married couple from the social club, and the children were finally in a safe, loving environment and they could start to recover. And then it was in late of 2019 where girl C got stuck in her room and she was banging on the door screaming, "Get me out, get me out." And it was from that moment that the truth finally started to be revealed of what these children had gone through, which is everything that I have just told you about. So when the 2 older children confessed to their foster parents what had happened to them over a decade, the foster parents went straight to the police and this whole nightmare finally got exposed for the very first time. So now the children had interviews with police and social workers and they detailed every single thing that had happened to them over the space of 7 years. Boy B, who was now around 9 years old, spoke about how he was desensitized to the abuse, that it happened to him so often it was just normal. Girl A spoke of the same thing. Girl A said that her life was a living nightmare and that she just got so used to it over time because it happened every day. Girl C also spoke and she was around 4 years old, and when she was asked how she felt, she said, quote, "Very sad." And when she was asked what it was like living in that flat, she said, quote, "Dark and scary. Beasties in it. Dark clouds come every night and day. It is very beastie. I do not like it. That is why it is called the Beastie House." Following this, the police opened a huge investigation. They pursued more than 1,000 lines of inquiry, making it one of the largest investigations in a child abuse ring ever in Scotland. It took over 6 months to investigate and no arrests were made. But by this point, news had spread in the local area of the child sex ring that had been taking place in this flat. And people from the local community actually started turning up outside of this drug den and protesting that they leave. And eventually 16 people were named as suspects, although I am sure that there were so many more. And the 16 people that were the suspects, obviously this included all 7 members of the evil gang that we have been talking about, and the other suspects were the other pedophiles that would arrive at the flat to abuse the children. And one of these suspects was Robert Brown, who was Rab Naylegs, who we spoke about earlier. And most of these evil people were arrested and charged, but then they were released on bail. They were just out there living their lives on bail. Ian and Elaine carried on living together as a couple. Newspapers actually photographed them walking around smiling as if they don't have a care in the world. They even caught Ian hopping out of a vehicle with a suspicious package, and I wonder what that was. Another one of the suspects, who was a man named Richard, got found guilty assaulting a 24-year-old woman whilst he was on bail because he lured her back to his flat and attempted to take her clothes off. So yeah, these people should not be out on bail. And whilst they were awaiting the trial, out of the 16 people that were charged, 5 of them died. I'm not joking here. Out of the 16, 5 of them died. Now, most of them died of drug-related offences because they pretty much all were drug addicts. The first one that died was Rob Naylegs. He died in November of 2020 from heroin intoxication. 6 months later, a 50-year-old grandmother named Maureen died after having a stroke. She had been facing 5 sexual offence charges, including rape of a young child. And when you think of child sex rings, your mind does immediately go to men. But I've just said a 50-year-old grandmother. That is not the kind of perpetrator that you think about when you think of a child sex ring. And then 8 months after her, a 55-year-old man called Stephen was found dead, probably drug-related. And then 2 more men, James and Douglas, were also found dead before they could go to trial. So then the trial finally gets started in November of 2023, which is 3 whole years after all of these people had been arrested and charged. So they had been out on bail, living their lives for 3 years. And on trial were 7 men and 4 women, believed to be the largest number of accused to appear together in the dock in recent history in Scotland. The ringleader, Ian, said that the system was, quote, conspiring against him. Another one of the accused, a man named Scott, accused the children of lying and making everything up. And he also said that a 12-year-old girl, so girl A, was, quote, promiscuous, and that he had been lured into carrying out these sexual offences under false pretenses. How can you be lured into sexually assaulting a child on false pretenses? Like, that just doesn't make sense. And who the hell describes a child as promiscuous? That just doesn't exist. No child on this planet is promiscuous. Elaine also denied all of the charges, and apparently she would, quote, battered anyone who she saw harming a child. And I'm like, sure, Elaine, sure. And throughout the whole trial, the evil group, they showed no remorse. They were even seen laughing and giggling together. However, the court was shown video testimony from the 3 children. They saw the 4-year-old girl C clutching her Peppa Pig, and she bravely gave the horrific details of her abuse. Girl A also described the abuse, and she was astonishingly articulate for her age. She showed remarkable insight into the impact of this abuse on the other 2 children, and her humanity shone through with her words. And at the end of the trial, thankfully, all 7 of the main group were found guilty. The ringleader, Ian, was found guilty on a number of charges, which included rape and also attempted murder for shutting girl C into the fridge and freezer on multiple occasions. Elaine was also convicted of 12 offences, which included rape and attempted murder. And Ian and Elaine were also found guilty of neglecting the 3 children. They were the only 2 accused of neglecting the children. And if you remember at the beginning of the video when I was like speculating who these children possibly belong to, and I said possibly they belong to Ian and Elaine, they are the parents of these children, this is why I think that, because no other person was charged with neglect of the children. And in my mind, I have just figured out that Ian and Elaine are charged and now have been found guilty of neglecting the children because they are the parents and they owe a duty of care for their own children. Obviously, I could be completely wrong on that, but that is just how I figured out that it's possible that Ian and Elaine are the parents of these children. Leslie was also found guilty of 5 charges, which included rape of the 2 girls. Paul was also convicted of 7 offences, which included rape of all 3 children. And then the other members of the group, Scott, Barry and John, they were also found guilty of rape. Another woman that was on the trial, a woman called Mary Ann Gallagher, was cleared of all offences to do with sexual assault, but she was still convicted of assault because she had hit and kicked the children. And then there was 3 other people on the trial who were Richard, Mark and Leona, and they were acquitted of all charges. So we have 8 people that have been found guilty for all of the abuse towards these 3 children. But now they need to be sentenced, and there was such a long delay between them being found guilty and them being sentenced, because their sentencing hearing only took place in January of 2025. So 40-year-old Mary Ann Gallagher, who was the one that was cleared of all sexual charges but still found guilty of assault, she was sentenced to 12 months in prison, which she had already served awaiting sentencing, so she was released immediately. You can actually see news articles of her just out and about living her life. However, as for the 7 evil members of the group, thankfully they were all given lifelong restriction orders. And this is the most serious sentence that can be handed down in Scotland that doesn't involve murder. And a lifelong restriction order doesn't necessarily mean that they will be held behind bars for the rest of their life. However, it does mean that after they have served their minimum prison sentence, and if they are released, because they may not be released, but if they are released, they will now constantly be held on parole for the rest of their natural lives, which means that they will have to have regular check-ins, any breaches of their parole, and they will be straight back in prison. So when it came to their minimum sentences that they were handed, Ian was sentenced to 20 years, Elaine was sentenced to 17 years, Paul was sentenced to 15 years, Leslie was sentenced to 14 years, John was sentenced to 10 years, Barry was sentenced to 9 years and 6 months, and Scott was sentenced to 8 years. And those are the minimum years that all of those people have to serve. But that doesn't necessarily mean that they will get out after those terms. And hopefully they never will. Like, these people do not deserve to ever have freedom ever again. And in the aftermath of this case, the judge on the case actually said that this case is one of the worst examples of human behavior that they have ever come across. That such depravity against children is unimaginable. He also praised the children in their bravery and strength for coming forward. And it is said that these convictions are the downfall of the biggest paedophile network in Scotland since 2009. However, an independent review will be carried out in this case to try and figure out how authorities messed up so badly. How did these children go under the radar for so long? How did no one figure out what was going on? And how was it that when the children did come onto the radar of social services, why were they not removed for 2 years? And I am thankful that a review will happen into this case, because people need to answer for what they have done in this case, and hopefully nothing like this ever happens again. And finally, the 3 children, they still remain in the foster care of the married couple, and I just wish those children all the best. I just hope that one day they can all recover from this ordeal that they have gone through, and their new carers have been described as incredibly supportive, kind, loving, which is exactly what those children need. And I just wish the children and their foster parents all the best, because they deserve the world. Those children deserve love and happiness and hope. And that brings us to the end of today's absolutely heartbreaking case. I can't believe that this case actually exists. Like, how is this real, this case? It was definitely a heavy one to bring to you today, and it's just shocking to me that cases like this still happen in today's modern world. So as always, let me know your thoughts, theories and opinions, and don't forget to let me know your case suggestions in the comments down below, because I always want to know what you want to hear next. Thank you again to June's Journey for sponsoring today's video, and I can now reveal the answer from the challenge for June's Journey, and the answer was footprint. There is a muddy footprint hidden in the scene, and you can download June's Journey now to investigate. So that is everything from me, and I'll see you all in my next video. Bye.